you know, the whole experience with your mom and meeting Pietro Russo, your stepdad. When I read it, it was a beautiful story because it showed that people were reaching out to each other. Your mom was trying to, in her heroic way, care for you and protect you, and she did it. Here you are sitting with me, being able to talk about it. And when you encountered Pietro, I know you described it a few times, but this was essentially a Renaissance man. Pietro was essentially a Renaissance man.
Yes, he was. He, as was custom in Sicily at the time, he was the one who was elected to get higher education. What they usually would do in a family where there were 8, 10, 15 kids, the youngest one would be given the opportunity to complete the studies at the university, and they sent him to the university. That's where I think that he sharpened his intellect and realized that he really did not fit within his own family.
Mm-hmm.
He had sort of extricated himself from the various historical obstructions of life created both by religion and by customs, let's say. And coming to Ospedaleto for him was sort of a resurgence, because he was able to mingle with people who were really the people he wanted to mingle, but he never had an opportunity. People who were either British or French or Swiss or Germans or from any other country of the world, and who spoke literally a different language, a different intellectual language. After all, Pietro was born in 1909, so by the time he turned to be 20, there was already Mussolini.
Yeah.
So he was raised in practically during a dictatorship, and listened to the radio, which he did, like everybody else did, to the Italian radio, didn't give you an opportunity to really find out what was going on in the world.
Sure, sure. Well, you know, I kept reading about your reaction to him and seeing almost a person who symbolized, your mother to me symbolized freedom and liberty in many ways. I mean, she was iconic in my mind for that. And he symbolized, in a way, Italy's better half, struggling to be free and to be open to the world and to understand the world. And I think that just looking at the pictures, which, by the way, are wonderful pictures. They're very clear. They give you a clear idea of what was going on in the town. And even in these pictures, Mr. Russo glowed. I mean, there was a glow that comes from him. And he was a happy person, as I understand.
He was an unusual human being. The few people who are left who knew him, because unfortunately their generation, most of the people are going. There was a lady who was part of the friends that they had in Mexico, and I spoke to her once, and that must have been probably 15, 20 years ago. Oh, or maybe not, maybe 15 years ago. And she said to me, you know, your parents have been gone 15 years. He says, and when we get together with our friends, there's not a time that goes by that we don't spend most of that time talking about your parents. Both my parents were very unique.
Yes.
Very unique in their own way.
Yes.
Pietro was a totally unusual individual. I say in the book also that I probably was the first one to fall in love with him before my mother did. You know, that can be taken in different ways, but I know how I meant it.
Yes, yes.
And the way I meant it was that he was the kind of individual that his expressions, his modus operandi, his way of speaking, his way of looking at you, he just emanated love and kindness. and he was always ready. He too, he had absolutely no money value.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he could spend anything on my mother. As far as himself, he didn't need money. And if not for my mother, he would probably wear the same suit for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't need more than 2 suits.
Yeah.
My mother had to force him to get some other things, because he didn't earn it. But my mother, he would give her anything.
Now, as I understand it, when after the war ended, he and your mom tried to settle in the United States, and he was not doing well at it. He wasn't comfortable.
He felt very uncomfortable. He made a very basic mistake in coming here. My mother and I came as wartime immigrants, and that was easy. He, on the other hand, being Italian, had to meet a certain quota. He didn't want to meet the quota, but he could come in as a tourist.
Mm-hmm.
So he got a tourist visa, but in a very unthinkable way, he only bought a one-way ticket.
Mm.
So when he landed in the United States, at the customs, they realized he only had a one-way ticket. That wanted an explanation of that. And they held him in Ellis Island for 5 days.
Wow.
To get the explanation. And the explanation was that we were going to pick him up. We had to put up a $500 bond, which in 1950 was equivalent to $50,000 today.
Sure.
Had to come up with a $500 cash bond, and he stayed in Ellis Island for 5 days because they wanted assurance that he was going to leave within a certain period of time. So that really created a terrible obstacle for him.
Yeah.
It completely distorted the picture of what he had envisioned America to be.
Yes.
He wanted to come to the United States because there was the land of liberty, freedom. He didn't want to be in Europe anymore, and particularly in Italy, because in addition to what fascism had done, at that time in 1946, the Vatican started to take over the Italian political scene.
Oh yeah, the Christian Democrats.
Well, but it was more than that.
Yeah.
Because the Vatican sent out edicts to the churches. You have to tell people that if they don't vote for the Christian Democrats, they'll be excommunicated.
Sure.
And my father resented that, even though he was not a practicing Catholic. He resented that, and he wanted out. And so when he came to the United States and he had this experience of Ellis Island, the impression of the land of liberty disappeared. He had a different problem after that, and that is he had difficulty learning the language. Both my mother and I spoke the language when we came here. At least we could manage, and it didn't take long for us to learn it. He only knew Italian and Latin, but Latin not a speaking language. And he had trouble, and he wanted to go out to earn some money. He didn't want me to support the family. That was his own ego. And here was a man, graduated attorney, who never practiced but still was a professional graduate, who was getting jobs working in a cheese factory with water up to his knees. Then he went to work as a presser in a clothing factory. He never complained, but you could tell. I mean, he doesn't take, he carried his heart on his sleeve, so whatever happened inside of him, you could always tell. And then, in order for him to be able to remain in the United States, my mother was able to get meet a congressman who would pass a bill in Congress. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But you have to pass a bill in Congress for individual people to change their status. The law at that time required for him to leave the United States for 24 hours and re-enter as an immigrant and get rid of that status of tourist. He had a choice to go Canada or to go to Mexico, and I really don't remember why he chose Mexico, but he did. As it turned out, he went to Mexico, got out of